On today's show, we've got David Ramil. We're going to talk about Max Strus. It's time for the much overdue Max Strus scouting report. Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. We'll tell you more about Birddogs later, but go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA and enter our promo code LockedOnNBA for a free water bottle with any purchase. We promise you won't want to take your Birddogs off. I'm Chris Manning. Jake Stevens, as always, is on production. We have David Ramil, one of the hosts of Locked On Heat, here today to talk about Max Strus. David, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much. I'm sorry it took so long for us to get this together. I was over in Springfield, as I told you before. When you first invited me on the show, I had to go over to cover Dwayne Wade's induction. Former Cavs legend, Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, it's kind of, odd for you as a Miami Heat focused, primary Miami Heat writer and a co-host of a Miami Heat podcast to go to the Hall of Fame induction of a Cavs lifer, but I respect your commitment to someone who only spent a small portion of his career in South Beach. I respect it.
Good times. But I'm glad to be here. I'm ready to talk about Max Strus.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add about the Dwayne Wade thing is truly, if I could. There are more important things I feel like I could ask him if I got to ask him one question on True Serum. But I would really just like a 10-minute honest answer about everything that happened in the 3 months he was a Cleveland Cavalier. Because I just think there was a lot going on. Yep. Isaiah Thomas was there. There was him and Kevin Love reportedly didn't see eye to eye. Yep. There's just so much.
much. I know this is a major digression here, but did I ever tell you the most miserable team I've ever seen in my life was that year's Cavs team, before the trade deadline?
Yeah.
Oh man, it was just a terrible. It was an early practice, and LeBron being LeBron had them practice way the hell away from the Amway Center in Orlando. That's when I was living in Gainesville, Florida, and I was covering the Magic, or at least going to Magic games. And so they practiced at this weird facility an hour away from the arena. It was 9 a.m., maybe even before that in the morning. And they just rolled out of there. They were in the midst of a 3-game losing streak, and they wound up losing that day in Orlando as well. Just absolutely miserable. And nobody seemed to like each other. And Jay Crowder was on the team at that point. Isaiah was on that team, but he wasn't really playing much because he was still hurt. Dwayne was on that team, and he had his relationship with LeBron. But other than that, it was just such a miserable. They hated being there at that particular time. Then the trade kind of ignited them, and they still got to the finals anyway. So,
look, the one of the most memorable games I've ever covered in my life will be the pre-deadline game where now Miami Heat superstar, then Minnesota Timberwolves Jimmy Butler took the Cavs to the limit. LeBron hits a game winner over Jimmy, and then he jumps past Isaiah Thomas into Jetty Osman's arms to celebrate the game winner. What a time that was for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It was about a decade ago. But let's talk about Max Strus.
Yeah, let's do that.
David, I think for him in coming to Cleveland, I think Cleveland's idea of him and the value he's going to provide, and 90% of his value is on offense. I think it's as a shooter. I think it's as a guy who can shoot in a bunch of different ways. Maybe, obviously we saw in the finals, he had that little dip at the beginning of the series, but a very good shooter and a high volume shooter. What is your read on Strus as the offensive player? Is that the correct read on my part in your mind?
Yeah, I guess that is where the value would be. He's not an elite shooter, though. That's the whole thing. There is more to his game than just the shooting. But he was kind of reduced into that role in Miami because that's really what they needed him to do the most. And I think that's probably what they'll wind up having him do the most of in Cleveland as well. So he was an off-ball player. He does have the ball in his hands, and occasionally he does ignite the offense. But mostly, I don't see that role for him in Cleveland. I know that we'll talk about that a little bit later. But he's smart. He's heady. He really understands how to play off of different players. And there was so much going on in Max's brief stint in Miami, in between different players coming on and off the bench, starting, not starting, incorporating new players, trying to figure everything out. It was, not to say disastrous, because obviously Miami still enjoyed great success despite Max, or regardless of whoever was out on the floor. but it was just very hard to kind of figure out exactly where he was going to play and what he was going to play on any given night. Like he'll tell you, my role is just to go out there, play off Jimmy and Bam, figure out a way to make a positive impact and get us to a dub. Like that's his standard answer. And that's pretty much what he did. But at the same time, you want a stability as a player. You want to be able to figure out exactly what you're going to do on a nightly basis. And that was so tough just because Max, again, he was a plug-in player. Like you could just put him in there in the starting lineup. You could come off the bench and he was going to figure out some way of doing something. But he wasn't also counted on to be that productive. But yeah, as far as his offense is concerned, as a shooter, I could see that being the expectation. But I'm a little leery of that. And I think Heat fans kind of figured that out as well. It's like you could have really the term that Spo used to love talking about him and Duncan was ignitable, right? Guys that could catch fire. Maybe that's true of any 3-point shooter. But with Max, it was like you were going to have some good nights and then we're going to have some not so good nights. And then when he has those not so good nights as a shooter, that making that positive impact wasn't always as obvious. And then the kind of flaws in the overall aspects of his game kind of stood out a little bit more as well. And I think it led to some frustration. And I think you're hearing a lot of national media, and I wonder if you could speak to this as well as like saying, oh, Miami's going to struggle a little bit because they lost 2 starters. And Heat fans and myself are saying, nah, are they really? Like, that's not really much of a struggle. These guys, like Max in particular, started because, Tyler Hero got hurt and there were many other options. You weren't going to go with Duncan Robinson. And he had been a starter on and off throughout the season. But like these guys were role players that Miami developed into functional quality players. And we've yet to see the player that leaves Miami's system and continues to flourish outside of Miami.
So on the Heat point, I just kind of assumed they're going to find someone who played 8 games for Sioux Falls last year, and then like they'll be playing in the NBA Finals. Like that's just seemingly how this works, which is like sort of the funny thing about how Strus comes to me in a way too, because he plays 2 games with the Bulls in 2019-20, gets hurt. He's on the Heat Summer League team, I believe, that next summer. Yeah. And then it's really the last 2 seasons he kind of became more and more of a mainstay in the team. 68 games, 16 starts in 21-22. Then last year, age 26 season, 80 games played, 33 starts, played almost 30 minutes a night. So, maybe there's like a simple answer here, David, but like what allowed Strus to actually break through in Miami and become someone who played 80 games last year, was a starter on a finals team, albeit an unorthodox one, and then just got them. Like, what led to where we ended up here, in your mind?
Aside from the work and everything else, and that really stood out, he kind of had a little bit of dog in him, and I think it kind of stood out in sharp contrast as Duncan Robinson. Like, Duncan had gotten that big contract a couple of years ago, and as a result, I think his personality kind of reflected the fact that maybe there was the imposter syndrome, and he kind of shied away from it, and he kind of took a step back in terms of his actual on-court production as well. At the same time, Max was coming on as a guy who showed a little bit of extra flash too. There wasn't just the reliance of the 3-point shooting, as you've seen from the off-season workout videos. He can't put the ball down. He has pretty high athleticism. I think a lot of people probably don't expect that being a white kid from Chicago or whatever, but the reality is that he can get up there and he'll be happy to jam it on somebody without a problem. So you will see the occasional dunk. So I think that was a big part of it. It's like you're seeing Duncan kind of like, oh man, I've got this big contract, kind of not living up to the expectations of that deal. And Max is like, hey, I'll step in. I'll figure it out. And I you talked about the starts and the number of games played. Like he started every game in Miami's playoff run last year, and he started every game in Miami's playoff run this year, all the way to the NBA Finals last year, to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think that says something. And you talk about the fact that he doesn't shy away from the moment. And yes, you can't necessarily count on him to step up and be 15, 20 points per game or anything like that. But if he has an opportunity and he's feeling it, you'll see a different version of Max that is much more comfortable in that role as a starter on a playoff team with championship aspirations than, say, Duncan Robinson. So I think that was a big part of it, yeah.
Do you like his fit? The kind of the last offensive question I have is, do you like his offensive fit working off of Garland and Mitchell and in between predominantly 2 bigs and Mobley now? And do you like him as the 5th offensive piece and what is going on there?
yes and no. With Donovan, we see a lot of kind of over dribbling around the perimeter and then putting up a shot. With Darius, not so much, I'd say. And I think Max kind of just needs a little bit. He needs more of the inside-outside game. That's how we kind of see him in his best moments. He was there as the outlet pass on the perimeter after Jimmy and or Bam or somebody else, Tyler, to some extent, had the ball inside the circle there and then kind of just put it out to a shooter. And that's where he kind of stepped up and knocked those shots down, or could put it down again and drive to the rim and create secondary offensive opportunities. I don't know. It could work. It could work. And I think all of those players are smart enough to kind of figure it out and understand their own respective strengths. But I think there will be an adjustment period where it might look a little clunky at first.
Yeah, that seems right. All right, coming up next, let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. Let's say Max Strus is the starting three. Is that a tenable defensive thing? We'll talk about that coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Birddogs. Birddogs make you look good. Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Birddog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts, too, that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. How did Birddogs fix this issue, you might ask? Well, they fixed the issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Birddogs also uses anti-stink sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Birddogs are functional for any occasion. That includes golf, a date, an evening out with friends, going to the pool, working out, lounging, and work. I gotta say, my favorite pair of Birddogs that they've sent us right now are these pair of blue everyday wear shorts that they sent me. I know all of our hosts have gotten some in at least in different colors, and they're super comfortable. They are great for a day of walking around in the heat right now. Yes, it is muggy and warm and annoying in Cleveland, Ohio right now, but these shorts keep me looking good and feeling good. I build my fits all around these baby blue shorts. And, I don't have them on right now. They're in the wash right now. But, they send you free stuff, too. Look at this amazing tech hat. It's great for the summer months, too. Go to birddogs.com/LockedInNBA or enter our promo code LockedInNBA at checkout for a free Birddogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedInNBA for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. All right. Defensively, Max Strus, David. I find him, in watching him in the playoffs, watching him in the regular season, to be someone who I don't expect to defend your apex predator wings. I don't think that's what he's going to do. Evan Mobley's going to have to do that a lot. Well, to his credit, I think he really fights. At least he did in Miami. We'll see again if there is like a non-Miami thing that happens there. That would be a big problem, I think, if it does. And he's not a pushover. And I think if you're going to say, hey, we need you to be a competent defensive wing in between Mobley and Allen, I think that can work. Is he the perfect guy to then cover for Garland and Mitchell? Probably not. But I think is he a decent enough complement on the wing as a team defender? I think that can work, especially if Evan Mobley is as good as at least I think he might be.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really nicely. He's a decent, competent. I like to use the term earnest because you do see the effort there. Like there is, again, the athleticism is not so lacking that he's just going to get blown by or anything like that. He's not going to be a pushover, as you mentioned. And so he can do just enough, but he's not like in an ISO situations, he'll be targeted. Not to the same extent as on Miami's own roster as Tyler Hero and or Duncan Robinson. Like those guys were like, okay.
Well, it's okay. So will he be targeted more or less than Garland and Mitchell?
Probably similarly, I'd say. I could see. Yeah, there are going to be moments there. Like his footing, his foot speed is not great. He tries. I think he uses mostly like the anticipation aspect of it, so he can kind of understand exactly where an offensive player is going. Does a lot of film work and things of that sort, so he can kind of make up for whatever physical tools he might be lacking. So I think that's a big part of it. I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I'd say probably you'll see a couple moments there where he's going to get got, and that's just all there is to it. Like you just have to give those up and hope that he can make up for it on the offensive end. And there were moments there, that Heat fans grew frustrated with because he wasn't having those big games offensively, or even solid games offensively. And given his limitations defensively, it's like, well, what is he even out there for? If you're looking at, this goes back to the offense, Duncan, and I hate tying them together, but it's just the kind of the way that these players kind of fit into Miami system, both, cast-offs and who've wound up thriving in Miami, and known for their shooting. Like Duncan, I would still count on being the better shooter, just because, he put up historic numbers. That those numbers trailed off at some point. I don't know what that was, other than the psychological aspect of it, and teams may be preparing for him a little bit more. But at least the feeling was that you were getting enough, or at least the potential for him to provide some offense was enough to offset whatever defensive issues there might have been. With Max, you just kind of say he's a good all-around gamer, but nothing is ever going to really stand out enough where you could say, okay, well, I feel comfortable and competent with him, being in the starting lineup and providing that extra edge. There were moments, and I know I'm kind of making it seem a little bit more negative. There were just like Miami's incredible historic postseason doesn't happen if Max doesn't go off in the first quarter, I think, of the matchup, the play-in tournament game against the Chicago Bulls. Like, he was huge in that game. And then there were other moments throughout the playoffs too, where he had just like ignitable, to Eric Spoelstra's term there. But then there were other games where he was a non-factor, and he was kind of a non-factor in the NBA Finals when they really needed him. And I know that was the big thing, is like, well, Miami kind of relied on this historic shooting to get there, and when that tapered off, well, what do you have left? And that's kind of where Max is. If he's not putting up 5-6 threes, then what are you getting out of him? He's not a playmaker, although he does have that aspect. He's not a great defensive player. So, if you're not getting that kind of contribution from offensively, then there are moments there where you kind of go, oh, okay, well, he's kind of just a non-factor out there.
So Miami's scheme, I think the other part about this that is worth thinking about, and at least having on the radar, it can be difficult to unpack. I'll acknowledge that. Miami's scheme is different than what Cleveland's is. I think Cleveland has a Jared Allen in a way that like Miami doesn't play that exact type of rim protector. Bam is better than Jared Allen, but they're different.
Yeah.
There's no Jimmy Butler.
Everything.
There's no like.
Yeah, Cleveland doesn't switch everything.
No, they don't.
They go drop, right? I mean, that was Jared Allen. Okay.
Yeah, they a lot of drop. They could with Mobley. There's a little more versatility you could do now. Like Mobley's rookie year, they ran the zone that I think would make sense for Strus, but they didn't run it at all last year. I don't really know why. With Mobley, there's a little more room to switch, but certainly like you're not going to switch with Garland. Like you could switch with Kyle Lowry just because he's kind of thick in a way that you can't with Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell. Like there is just like maybe more with Mitchell because he's longer and kind of strong and stocky in a way, but like it is a little different. So considering he's going to go to a different scheme, was there something about the Miami scheme that helped him, that hurt him? Is there anything when you think about it in that context that is worth maybe pinging around in your brain a little bit here?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, he's, again, on the perimeter, when he has to pick up, like a 4, that worked out for him. He was strong enough to at least hold his own, but there were moments too where he was kind of hoping he'd get bailed out, and without that added rim protector there, like in an ISO situation, if he switched onto a big, he's probably giving up the basket. He was good enough to hold his own along the perimeter with smaller guards and things of that sort. But if they were too quick, then again, you're probably giving up something. So in Cleveland's sense, you probably don't want to go with that kind of switch or zone or anything like that. I think with zone, maybe it probably would benefit him. I could see the bonus there for a guy like him, protect an area, and he's quick enough where he can kind of provide a little help and then recover and close out. Great closing out. I will give him that much. Like in terms of like closing out with Miami's heavy switch, like if it was a closeout, Max would try his damnedest to make an impact and affect the offensive player on the perimeter. But yeah, it's not always great, and so you'll have those moments again where you're going to give up something. And I mean, Mitchell and Garland are both negative defenders, right? And I'd say that's the case with Strus as well, where maybe he's an even defender, if anything, but that's again on his best nights. And so it's problematic. You're going to over rely on Allen and Mobley to a greater deal, even more so than maybe last year, because Okoro is a plus defender, right? So you're kind of counting on him to provide some of that wing defense, and you're not necessarily going to get that from Strus.
Look, there's still a role for Isaac Okoro, and this is not an Isaac Okoro episode, but like I kind of think there's a way for him to find his way within what this roster is. But that is going to be some peak like late September content for me personally when we get to that. All right, coming up next, how does Max Strus make the Cavs better? We'll discuss that, debate that coming up next. All right, let's wrap up today with David Ramil talking about how Max Strus does or does not make the Cavs better. David, the Cavs last year have this flame out in the playoffs, lost to the Knicks. This isn't necessarily because of Max Strus, but like Max Strus' team beat the New York Knicks. I think like it pretty much handled them. I think, and he looked pretty good in that series.
Yeah.
I ask you because the Cavs go and play a premium for him. They clearly have aspirations. How does he in a way that I think matters does he make them better? Does he help them maybe get to the second round, maybe make a deeper run in the playoffs? Is this the kind of signing for them that can help elevate them in a way they kind of are aiming for?
No, I don't think so. I just don't see, like, I love the idea of him taking that next step. I just don't know that he's seen it. Maybe I'm just guilty of being trapped in the idea of who he was when he first came to Miami as a guy who was basically a cast off in the league and then just had to fit in where he could. And he won't, again, he didn't back down. He had no problem with Jimmy Butler and like giving whatever they got. And those are difficult personalities. And again, as I've said before, and as you well know, like if you can thrive in Miami, there's a good chance that you can take it, that you don't mind the pressure and things of that sort, because Miami is different run organization. And at the same time, like I just don't know where he kind of fits into the structural hierarchy of the Cavs roster. Like there is a ton of experience. Like I think he automatically becomes the most experienced playoff, in terms of like he's been to the finals, he's been on these deep playoff runs. Like that is pretty impressive. I mean, is there another player on the roster right now who's gone to the NBA finals? I can't think of one off the top of my head, but Max Strus is there.
Well, no, the one who did make the finals is now with the Miami Heat. So,
yeah. So I mean, it's pretty interesting there. So I don't know. I think he can. You wouldn't want to rely on him to be that guy. Like I love the idea of him. Like he's going to save you a game, maybe. Like there's going to be one game where he has that big quarter or a big half that's like, okay, this is what we want, and then Donovan kind of takes over, or Darius takes over, and you kind of have that even balance there. But he's just really a solid role player with some good potential moments. And I know that sounds like I'm knocking him, but I think that's still. Like that's a coveted player in the NBA, maybe just not at that kind of contractual worth that he received there. I mean, like you said, he's getting paid a premium. Like you want him to be like that star level player, and I don't know that Max is that guy. I think he'd be comfortable as a starter or as a bench player. He can play in different lineups. He's really smart. He's going to be great for Cleveland media. You're going to enjoy that kind of dry, acerbic wit of his. I know I certainly did. But he's just not, to me, that game changer. And he does. I didn't see him at that point during his Heat stint either. Like he was really good, really nice games here and there. But as much as it kind of sucks to see him move on, I totally understand why. Like, and I think there's a reason why Miami kind of tried their best to get Gabe Vincent back and didn't necessarily try as hard with Strus. Maybe it's just because they knew the writing was on the wall and Max was going to get paid a lot more than they could afford. But I also see they kind of, he's a replaceable player in Miami's system.
So let me play devil's advocate to this a little bit. I think you're mostly correct, but just to like be slightly contrarian and give my listeners here like and veer something interesting. If you go to how Cleveland gets bounced, they had such a problem with anyone playing the three that could shoot threes and drew respect from an opposing defense. Their defense in the playoffs was like fine. Like their defense against the Knicks was not the problem. Well, but the problem was that Isaac Okoro and Danny Green and Karis LeVert and these guys were not hitting shots in the way that they needed to. even if you're saying there is some variance in Max Strus, and like, is he an all-star? No. He's not. He's not going to make an all-star team, and he's making like above average player money above the mid-level. Like, I think there is just a ton of value in for them in him just being someone who's going to shoot a bunch of threes, make them at like between 35 and 38%, and defenses will close out on him. I think I understand like the price tag. I think we also just have to realize we're in an era in the league where these price tags for like fifth starter, seventh guy off the bench guys are just going to be higher and feel like crazy. They're just going to like look like that. And I met the Max Strus thing. It went from, is he going to be for the mid-level to, is he going to get 15 million to, is he going to like, the Cavs had to do a sign-in trade to get him. They had to get him. They had to hard cap themselves, which is fine. Like, it doesn't really matter that much for this year, but they had to hard cap themselves to get him. Like, they prioritized this. I really think the bet they're making, and I understand it, and I tend to be sympathetic to it, is they looked at what they got at the wing in the playoffs and said, we cannot do that again. Let's just pay for competence because we believe that Darius is going to get better. We believe in how good Donovan Mitchell is, and probably most importantly, we think Evan Mobley is going to get better. So, like, I kind of understand they're paying for competence in a way that I think maybe like doesn't feel crazy as a big offseason move, but I think considering the context of how their playoff exit went, I kind of get it. I do get it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be those moments too. And again, it's kind of a balance where I know he's going to draw a defender and make things easier. And maybe that's just it too. It's like Miami's roster is kind of like a really, it's not to say that they're mid all the time, but you know, you don't really, outside of a Jimmy Butler explosion, you don't really have that player who's likely to go off. And I think in Cleveland's case, you have two that have that potential, right? And so if it's just enough, if Max provides just enough of that kind of edge that was missing against the Knicks last year, maybe that allows Mitchell to kind of have that room where he can, do his thing and have that kind of explosive offensive game. So I totally get it. And in that case, it's more about the idea of Max Strus rather than the actuality of him. And maybe he'll hit a three to start off a game, and it's like, okay, maybe he's feeling it. But again, there's also, the Knicks defense wasn't all that great either, and I think they could be physical in a way, or an opponent that knows how to guard Max can take him out of the game to a degree where he's not that kind of factor anymore. And yeah, you have to respect him because you never know if he might have that big game or whatever. But I think on the whole, you're not overly concerned with Max Strus going off. Like, you're kind of comfortable him having those points. And I think, again, it's about him being able to take some of the pressure off of those guys that you want with the ball in their hands, and in order to be able to have those big offensive games that could lead to an easier victory for Cleveland.
I think that's all right. I think he's going to be like a very good, competent role. But let me ask you this last question, David. Yep. Should he be their starter at the three? I think if the season started today, I think he would.
Yeah.
If their options are him, Okoro, Karis LeVert, like George Niang's not really a three. No. Is Strus to you the answer you go with at the three?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think, again, you might have some problems defensively with between those three kind of wing players, but I don't know. I think, wow, yeah, you kind of need him to. Like, it's not just about the money; it's about the impact of what he can do.
The skill.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think schematically he could fit in there, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him kind of on and off throughout the season, and kind of based on whether or not he gets into a rut or something like that. Maybe you might see a change. I guess if I had to bet right now, I'd say he's probably the starter, but I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't remain that throughout the whole season.
Yeah. All right. You can check out David Ramil over at Locked On Heat. He does that with Wes Goldberg. David, hopefully for your sake, the Damian Lillard trade happens sooner rather than later.
It's great content, man. And we've had a lot to talk about. Between the finals run and Damian Lillard requesting a trade, it's been smooth sailing for us over at Locked On Heat.
How did you do a week's full of worth of episodes when he played that Will Smith song in the club in Paris?
We broke it down like the Zapruder film, and
that's what we do. Yeah, that's the beauty. All right, we'll talk to everyone. We'll be Locked On Cavs back this week. Go check out Locked On Heat as well. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for producing.